This week's watch assignments covered notable Alex Gibney films, including Taxi to the Dark Side, Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room, and Gonzo, The Life and Work of Dr. Hunter S. Thompson. In his interview, Gibney mentions following the threads and finding the characters around the story. I found this to be very much prevalent in all three films because even though the main headlining subject of the film is not present, the stories still find purpose and are told by those who either knew the subject directly or remained close to the story itself. I think the films were successful in this regard and helped me better understand how stories can be told even if the main subjects of that specific story are unavailable. In addition to including journalists, Gibney's films incorporated real footage, both of which furthered credibility since Dilawar, the guys convicted at Enron, and Hunter S. Thompson are not present to defend themselves on screen. I'm not the biggest fan of these films, specifically because I think Gibney doesn't push the limits far enough in terms of holding the characters on screen accountable for their actions and choices. Even if the characters are at fault, Gibney portrays them in an ambiguous light as they justify their actions were due based on choices that were outside of their control, that someone other or something externally is to blame. A follow-up question may be to ask to what extent can we blame these characters, but I think it's also important to ask to what extent can we forgive. There's a limit to all of this, and how much are we willing to push? The subjects on screen are not 5-year-old children who didn't know any better. They are all male and female adults who made conscious choices. I mentioned this last week in our class discussion too, but watching American males for all three films on screen basically say it wasn't me, they made me do it, and not being held accountable for their choices is tiring and doesn't come off authentic to me at all. Every subject on screen had a choice. Every subject on screen made a choice. And unless Gibney's on-screen subjects had their hands tied to the ceilings and were tortured in every possible way, like the prisoners and victims of Bagram in Taxi to the Dark Side, which, spoiler alert, they were not, I just don't buy the argument presented to me. If Gibney had made these same identical films and released them in present day, personally, I think audiences would be much more critical about the subjects on screen than they were back then.